I'm going to bring up Gabe Tews from the American Psychological Association, who's going to introduce our featured speaker tonight. We're very happy to have Sam Brinton, who is an accomplished human rights advocate and also a scientist, a nuclear engineer. So we're very happy to have somebody who brings all of that experience as our featured speaker tonight. But first I'll have Gabe come up and introduce.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to start by thanking Teresa and her team for organizing such a wonderful conference, and to thank all of you for remaining here to hear our wonderful featured speaker tonight, Sam Brinton. My name's Gabe Tews, and as Teresa mentioned, I represent the American Psychological Association on the AAAS Science and Human Rights Coalition. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to introduce Sam. I spent many years working as a lobbyist, in part on LGBTQ-related advocacy, so I became very familiar with Sam's important and effective work as the head of Advocacy and Government Affairs at the Trevor Project, which I'm sure you all know is the leading national organization focused on crisis and suicide prevention efforts among LGBTQ youth. They are a well-known presence on Capitol Hill. Sam has written for outlets such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, and many other publications, featured on CNN, MSNBC, PBS NewsHour, and other media platforms, and has spoken at innumerable UN, congressional, and other events. They are an expert on mental health and suicide prevention among sexual and gender minority youth, and are perhaps the loudest opponent of sexual orientation and gender identity change efforts, otherwise known as conversion therapy. In short, they are one of the world's leading advocates for LGBTQ youth. And if that's not enough, Sam is also a nuclear engineer by training, a past congressional fellow, and the founder of Core Solutions Consulting, which provides services to address energy and science policy challenges. As I hope is clear, Sam truly embodies what it means to live and work at the nexus of science and human rights. We are very grateful they're here today. I don't want to take any more of their time, so Sam, the floor is yours.
One second while we do a little bit of tech. 1 second. Perfect. Perfect. There you are. Sorry, I have to bring up a cool Prezi because I don't do PowerPoints because I'm a millennial, so that's a thing. Yay. Prezis are basically the easiest way to impress Congress because they've never seen them before, so just hints for you for your research. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, MIT for the realness. Don't worry, we'll talk about MIT. Little known fact that you should know about MIT, they advertise on the ground. All of our posters are on the ground because they know that no one was going to look up. So as you're walking the hallways, you actually look down on the left and the right, and you see all of the event posters because they know that's how you'll actually get you to the event. So little known fact, boom. Perfect, and present. Yay for not having technical difficulties. I love it when that works out that way. Hello, everyone. As was said, my name is Sam Brinton. I'm going to have, I will stay over here. I will have a little bit of an interesting conversation for you tonight. I'm going to talk to you about the balance of what it's like to be a nuclear physicist, an LGBT advocate, and a person who tries to make those not at juxtaposition, but instead in synergy, which I know is the total buzzword, but we'll go with it. So I've titled this From Nuclear Waste to Conversion Therapy to Gender Fluidity. These are all tough conversations that I have on a regular basis with the President of the United States, members of Congress, youth across the country. I just got back this morning from Kansas having a conversation just like this, because it doesn't matter whether you're a kid in Kansas or the leader of the free world, we all have to have the tough conversations about how science and policy impact our lives. So let's get started, shall we? Maybe not. Yes, cool. Who am I? You heard my bio, so I don't need to repeat all of it. My name is Sam. I use they and them as my pronouns. I want to start with that before I tell you a little bit more about me, because my identity and how I want to be referred to is a strong way for me to start a conversation well. Had I just been introduced with he and him pronouns, this entire rest of this night would have been basically ruined for me, because I would have been thinking, that person didn't listen to what I had to say, that person didn't hear who I was. So I just gave you a little bit of information about me. You're welcome. I use they and them as my pronouns. As was said, I have graduate degrees from MIT in nuclear engineering and technology policy. I have my undergraduate degrees from Kansas State in nuclear engineering, vocal music performance, and Chinese language, because like Pokemon, gotta catch them all. I tend to be a person who finds that my work started in disarming nuclear bombs. I have the rare distinction of saying that I have disarmed more nuclear bombs than James Bond has, which is a lot, actually, if you think about how many movies he's done that. And yet at the same time, I now work to save LGBTQ youth from suicide. My husband, as of January, says that I am the weirdest Batman known to mankind, saving kids by day and the world from nuclear war by night. But this is where it all started. So my nuclear side, and I know this is gonna be a lot of anecdotal. Don't worry, there's no graphs, no data, you're lucky. I wanted to give you a little bit of perspective, though, of why my human rights work is centered in my science work. So, before we get to that, you need to know why I became a nuclear engineer. There's the story I tell the New York Times, and then there's the story I tell my friends. I'm gonna tell you the story I tell my friends. I tell the New York Times that I did it because it was a grand challenge that was going to push me academically and make me think really hard about some of the world's great problems, which is true. But the real reason I became a nuclear engineer was because my parents wanted me to go to a very conservative Christian school in Florida. I used the Choose Your Own Major book, crossed off every major that was available at that Christian school, got to the letter N, found nuclear engineering, and was like, Mom, I've always wanted to become a nuclear engineer. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how I chose nuclear engineering as my field. I'm really lucky it worked out. But I think that that's an interesting perspective in that science is exploratory. We recognize that I don't have to be, let's be very clear, quantum physics was horrible at MIT. I was not the best in my class, but I was always the best at communicating my passion. And I was finding a way to get through what I know I needed. I knew I needed college. I could not survive at this really conservative Christian college because it wasn't gonna work for me. I had gone through what you're gonna hear later on about a thing called conversion therapy, where they tried to forcibly change me into a straight individual. And so I knew that in order for me to have a good academic experience, I had to put myself in the best opportunity for that to be placed. And that's why we need science programs. There's only roughly about 10 nuclear engineering programs left in the country. I literally, when we talk about like, oh, I have a gay friend, you might know them, that awkward statement that is not true, we do not all know each other, we actually all do know each other for the nuclear engineers. We're very, very small. But that is where it all began. So I finished Kansas State University. I worked at the only nuclear reactor to ever directly be hit by a tornado. You're welcome. And then decided I was going to go to graduate school. I was very lucky to have a mentor who recognized that I really loved research. I loved seeing a problem, figuring out how to solve it, and then saying, this is all of the cool ways that I can do it. Yes, with the Prezi, right? Like this is what I learned. Don't you want to learn too? And found that I would then apply to and go to MIT. I say that it was the kingdom of the nerds where I was the queen. This is the weird part of my life, which was and directly in line with our conversation today, I was a nuclear engineer who had gotten in through an LGBTQ Diversity Fellowship. So every single one of my classmates felt that I didn't deserve to be there. That I had gotten a spot because I was gay, that didn't make me a real scientist, that made me a gay scientist. Now, I know you're all shaking your heads and be like, that couldn't possibly be true, but let's be very clear. I'm sure some of the women in this room have probably experienced the same exact thing. I'm sure some of the people of color remember that exact moment when they were told, well, that's why you got in. This was the creme de la creme of my academic career, and I was being told that I didn't belong because I was passionate about conversation and not passionate about neutron movement. That was my world. And so I started becoming really passionate about neutron movement and holding back my identities to make sure that my academic prowess would be what leads. And it went well. I graduated with 2 graduate degrees. I loved every moment of it. I was really lucky. I told you about MIT, how all of the posters are on the floor. This meant that I got to try out some horrible fashion styles and no one ever noticed. It was really, really great. It was an amazing place where I got to learn a lot about some of the great wonders of science. While there, I founded what was called the National Science Policy Group. So this was a national group. This was when sequestration was just around the corner. And 3 of us at MIT said we would write a graduate letter to Congress saying, when you sequester, it is not our professors who will be fired, it is us. We are the ones who will be cut from programs. We are the ones who will not make it through our academic careers. And the letter reached over 10,000 graduate students. It was the very first time that graduate students en masse talked about science policy. And over 30 science policy groups started to form around the country. And I thought, this must be what I'm going to be doing with my life, is I'm going to be taking this idea of science that its importance, and using my passion of conversation to make it something reality. So I left MIT with my degrees and moved to where, of course, I knew I would be, Washington, D.C., that beautiful home for all of us who have hope about policy. And it was dashed into pieces. I showed up sure that sequestration wouldn't happen. It did. I showed up sure that I would find all of the easy science policy jobs. They're very hard to find. And so I worked for think tanks, the great academia of Washington, D.C., and wrote reports on advanced nuclear reactors and how we could do some policy to make sure that they would move forward. It was an amazing moment. I was applying my nuclear world. I was good at my academic work. We passed a law through Congress within 6 months of me writing it. I was happy. The world was great. And then I realized that maybe this wasn't everything I wanted to do with my life, that I loved my academia and I loved my science policy, but by night, I was doing all of my activism. And I literally had this flip, that by day I was a nuclear engineer, and by night I was a gay, and by day I was a nuclear engineer, and by night I was a gay. And that is not very healthy. If you've ever tried to split your identities in this kind of way, it becomes very difficult. It all came to a head with a story that I will tell you right now, which involves the Oval Office. So I worked on the Iran nuclear deal. I helped technically translate what was happening, aka what is a centrifuge, what is all this kind of work, to congressional members. Because I was nonpartisan, working for a nonpartisan think tank, they trusted me. And also I had a bright red mohawk and heels at that time, so they were like, well, Sam's clearly everything on the front page. We might as well believe that they know what they're talking about nuclear centrifuges. That was amazing. I got to bring this technical translation to congressional work. We passed the Iran nuclear deal. You can think that it was bad. You're wrong. I saved your life. You're welcome. But all that is to say, I'm not very good at holding on to script, so don't worry, I'm never going to be invited back. So all that is to say is that we passed the Iran nuclear deal, and we're celebrating in the White House. This is your science policy story meets academia in one fell swoop. We are sitting there in the White House, and if you ever walked into the White House, here on your left is a grand staircase when you come in the front doors. They always walk down that staircase. They're very slow. It's very annoying. You've had like 1 or 2 wines. You're like, we have not eaten dinner. Michelle and Barack, please move a little faster. They get to the bottom of the stairs, and Michelle Obama does this kind of a motion. Everyone else is smart and parts ways, thinking that they couldn't possibly be them. I am the giddy ditzy little twig, and I walk over being like, oh, she must want to talk to me. She leans down, a goddess among women, and says, honey, your heels are taller than mine. Now, yes, I am in 6-inch stilettos because it's the White House and you don't wear bad shoes to the White House. I go ashen white, thinking that it is illegal to have higher heels than the First Lady, certain that is what is actually going to happen. Knowing that my academic prowess cannot defend me from the law, Constitution, Article 3, thou shalt not have higher heels than Michelle Obama. She says, follow me, and I follow her up the stairs, worried that I'm being kicked out of the White House because of my footwear. We walk into the residence, she pulls back a curtain, and there is a wall of heels. And she says, help me pick out a better pair. I literally squeak because all I know how to talk about, all of the talking points for tonight were how a centrifuge works, what is a neutron, like making these very simple spaces, not choosing Prada shoes. That was not like the thing that I thought I was going to be doing, but I realized this was this great moment. So I have a conversation with her while we're picking out shoes about how a nuclear reactor works, because she had heard I was a nuclear engineer and wanted to know how it worked. So in the next 2 minutes, while picking out shoes, we figured out what a nuclear reactor was, and just helping her understand that that's not a nuclear weapon. A nuclear reactor is not a nuclear weapon. These are different things. This is how they work in different ways. We walk back down the stairs, now hand in hand because we're besties, and get to the bottom of the stairs, to which Barack Obama says, where'd you just go with my wife? I, not thinking through that again, the situation that I'm in, said there was a national heel emergency, but I've solved it. I am not joking. That is the actual line I used with the President of the United States. We finish all of this. He jokes and says, thanks, Sam. And I squeak again because the President of the United States used my first name. And he says, Sam, you're a red mohawked nuclear engineer in heels in the White House. No one thought you were actually supposed to be here. Secret Service has checked on you 4 times. And I realized that that was exactly what it looked like. I didn't look like I deserved to be there, but my academic prowess got me the space in the room. I was allowed to be there because I knew what I was talking about. And so I helped the President of the United States talk a little bit about how a nuclear reactor worked. We just did it with Michelle, why not with Barack? Later on, we would go into the Oval Office, and yes, that photo is my heels on the Resolute desk in the Oval Office with a grainy photo because Barack wouldn't get a camera person. He did it with his cell phone. This is, to the end of my life, the worst photo because he wouldn't get an actual camera person. Going on further. So we finished talking about nuclear issues, and he says, what do you do when you're not talking about nuclear issues? And I said, this is it. This is my elevator pitch. You've all heard about the idea of an elevator pitch. It was just now with the President of the United States. I said, well, I work to end conversion therapy. You heard a little bit about it in my bio. You'll hear a little bit more about it later. And I said, I work to end conversion therapy. This is what conversion therapy is. This is how it's harming LGBTQ youth. This is how we're dying. This is how every major medical association said it was ineffective. 2 weeks later, front page of the New York Times, above the fold, President Obama came out against conversion therapy. It was one of the greatest moments of my life because I had used science to advocate for LGBTQ youth without ever having to make my division. I was the same Sam. The same Sam who knew how to disarm a nuclear bomb was the Sam who could work on LGBT issues because I was willing to be myself no matter what that was. And where does that balance come from? We're gonna move real quickly through this because I do want to make sure that I give more space. My puzzle pieces don't always fit together. I want to be very, very clear about that. I'm a person of faith. Try being a person of faith at MIT. That is like way worse than being gay. Way worse. I'm a pastor in a church, and that's not a problem to me because my faith is my own, it's not yours. And so I should do nothing in my life that should harm you, but at the same time, I should live my life that brings me happiness and fulfillment in ways that make me a better person. And I believe that my faith does that. But that's also going to be a juxtaposition with, for example, maybe evolution. I showed up to MIT having never understood evolution because for all of my life growing up as a missionary child, that was the most sinful idea possible. Now I had gotten into a world-class organization where all of my friends, when they heard that I didn't understand evolution, treated me like I was an idiot. Not realizing that for many of us, we have been physically trained that what you are saying is a lie. That life does begin at conception. That a lot of these science policy issues that you may not think are science policy are absolutely core to identity. That this is how we learn from our very first scientific books. And so I had to start figuring out how to make my puzzle pieces work. That sometimes when my nuclear and LGBT issues don't match directly, I can make something else work instead. I can say, well, you and I both come from Kansas, for example. Let's talk about that. And we'll build that as a background of, we both understand what a farm looks like. Okay, we'll move from that point into, wouldn't it be amazing if we could just, grow food that we didn't have to try to put a lot of chemicals on, but also chemicals have changed and saved our produce. Let's start to talk about all these issues in ways that we can actually access from common space. I also have the very wonderful challenge of bringing my multi-gender expression. This is not for you, to be very clear. These stilettos, aren't for you. I wear them every day. I have 52 pair of shoes, one for each week of the year. And that is my identity. I was on the Hill this morning, and yet, per usual, a senator, when hearing my heels click on the marble floors, took the corner, said, "Excuse me, miss," realized it was, "Sorry, Sam, forgot," and moved on, because that's the world that we're at. That I've explained that my heels do not make me any less of a professional. I can do my work just as well as anybody else. My expression is my own. As long as it doesn't offend you, that's not my problem, though, if it does. That's the whole point, is that it's my expression. I need to do it in ways that are professional, and I understand that. As scientists, the hardest part for me is that most people are like, well, they're not steel-toed boots. Like, what are we can't allow them in the lab. And I was like, okay, we need stilettos that are steel-toed then. This is our next grand challenge. I lead then into my activism. All of this work, all of this expertise brought me to understand that legislation, litigation, and public education was what I had to build my work on. And I do it at the Trevor Project. As I said, we are the world's largest organization for suicide prevention and crisis intervention. We serve 10,000 suicidal youth every single month. Our numbers have doubled in the last couple of years, and they're not going down. And that's why we're doing it. That's why we're there. We have both text and chat. Yes, we just even got a Google grant to use artificial intelligence to help within the first few seconds of your text and chat to figure out just how suicidal are you at this moment. What level are you at so we can get you to the exact right resource. Again, using science policy to save lives. But the way that I connect my science policy the most is on the issue that affected me the most, conversion therapy. I'm a survivor of conversion therapy, the dangerous, discredited idea that you can change someone's sexual orientation and gender identity. 700,000 LGBTQ people have gone through conversion therapy, with 20,000 at risk just this year alone. All of those youth being youth. Excuse me, all those 20,000 being youth. We are in an epidemic. At the Trevor Project, we hear from youth calling us after conversion therapy with nothing short of suicidal ideation every single day. And let's be clear, some of you are wondering, why does this in any way, shape, or form relate back to AAAS and science policy? Because science policy wasn't able to solve this. We can show them that every major medical and professional organization says that this is not effective, but science can't prove that it's harmful. Because scientists have pointed out, you would have to have a study where twins, one would go through conversion therapy and one wouldn't, both being LGBTQ, to have a truly blind study. Well, let's be very clear. No mother's like, I love you, Timmy, screw you, Tommy. That's not gonna happen. That's not gonna happen. And so we realized really early on that science policy couldn't solve this. I can tell you about the harms. I can tell you the science, but in actuality, I have to tell you my story for it to be effective. And that's where it all comes together. I use these photos as a really quick, I know that I don't have a lot of time, and I wanna make sure that we get through all of the rest of our evening. I'm gonna tell you my story very quickly. And I know that it's going to be painful, but you'll understand why it connects back after. I am the son of Southern Baptist missionaries. I was an adorable baby. I have had an amazingly loving family. We have lived on every continent except for Antarctica and Australia, because no one should live in Antarctica. Other than, sorry, there's probably scientists in here who've been there. Sorry, I apologize. All of this to say, we lived the life. While living in a missionary commune, my friends and I found a Playboy in the trash. I'm not going to comment how a Playboy was found in a missionary commune's trash. You can put that together. But all that is to say, my friends found it so exciting, I felt myself so holy and righteous that it didn't affect me. And so immediately went and tattled on my friends. Because that's what I do. I don't know how I have a security clearance. All that is to say, I did this amazing tattling. My father's super proud of me and asked me, have you ever had these feelings? I said, of course I have. I have those feelings when I think about Dale. I didn't realize I was even coming out. I was telling the person who I'd always trusted a piece of information that I knew to be true, but didn't realize would be horrific. My father would become extremely physically abusive. I would wake up in the emergency room because he had punched me so hard that I'd gone unconscious. After, I would come back with bruises from falling down the stairs, tripping on my bike. My mother would suggest the idea of conversion therapy. I would walk into conversion therapy and realize that this man loved God just as much as I did, so I would trust him. I would be told I was the only gay alive, that the government had come through and killed us all as children. I was told that I had AIDS, and that as an 11-year-old, I was soon to die from this horrible disease, and I was told that my God hated me. All of these things were emotional torture, and yet are legal in 32 states around the country right now. And then they would do something that was even more horrific. Aversion Therapy. My hands were placed in ice while pictures of men touching men were shown as a picture to me. My hands were placed in heat with wires wrapped around them with heat turned on when pictures of men touching men were shown and heat turned off when pictures of men touching women were shown. And finally, electrodes would be stuck in my fingers, and while porn played on the screen, I would be electrocuted. They were using science. They were using the idea of science to try to change a child. I know that wasn't very comfortable for you to hear, but it's the reality. They were using the idea of Pavlov's dogs to reposition a child's brain. I still, to this day, every single time I may hug or hold a person who I identify as a male's hand, I still feel the prick. Because I was an 11-year-old. My brain wired that way. Now, to be very, very important, because I do not want you to treat me like a leper, nor do I want you to think that I am broken. I've been able to get through it. I told you that in January, I married the love of my life. I walked down the aisle so scared that that kiss was going to hurt. Because with my first kiss, I puked within seconds. It was excruciating. And it didn't hurt to kiss Kevin. Because I knew the science wasn't correct. I now get to fight. I get to tell parents and teachers and doctors that what they're doing to these children is wrong. That it's not the option that this scientist is telling them. It is because every piece of data shows that it's not effective and that it's potentially harmful. We have lost too many of my friends to suicide because of this issue. So yes, I know that this doesn't necessarily sound like your typical science policy conversation, and I may never get invited back again. But I hope you see just how powerful science can be in both directions, in true harm and in true help. I'm not going to show you the video. I am the founder of an organization called Nuclear Pride, which is a great name, and is a whole 5 of us who are LGBT nuclear engineers. There's not very many, but I founded it because in the scientific world, I needed to have a home. I needed to be myself, because I realized I started passing laws in Congress a lot faster when I didn't have to not talk about Kevin. When I didn't have to not talk about the rest of my life. So I'm asking you as science policy professionals and as individuals who are interested in doing this work, you are better 9 to 5 when you're your whole self 24/7. That is what I hope you pull away from this. That bottom photo was roughly a year ago. On the same day, a law was passed in Congress on nuclear innovation called the Nuclear Energy Innovation Modernization Act, and we stopped conversion therapy in the state of New York. I was able to do both of these laws the same day because I recognized that while one was going to help solve, hopefully, the climate change problem, the other was going to save lives, and that neither of them had to be my only focus. Now, yes, it may be a little bit confusing some days which call I'm getting from which senator on which issue, and when I walk in, they don't know. Keep them guessing. But that's the whole point, is that I'm a good science policy person because I'm a whole individual as myself. So here's your homework. Yes, welcome to MIT, there's always homework. I need you to come out as a professional. Yes, obviously you may not all be LGBT. If you're not, it's cool. You're not as cool as us, but it's whatever. You may not all be LGBT, but coming out as a science policy individual is extremely important. I cannot express to you how much better my collegiate experience would have been if professors and staff and fellow engineers would have told me that science policy was cool, that they also were doing it, that I wasn't stupid for being interested in policy, I was innovative for thinking about policy. So come out as a science policy professional. Not all heroes wear capes, or in my case, stilettos to Congress. Second, engage those with which you disagree. I told you about a really bad issue called conversion therapy. You can all get involved with that. You can get engaged with professionals using the name of science to harm individuals. And you don't have to agree with them. Let's be very clear. This is a weird statement that is not political. To be very clear, what I'm about to say is not about a political party. It is about an individual and how they treat me. As you may know, the Vice President of the United States is a known supporter of conversion therapy. I am not talking about their party. I'm talking about them as an individual and what they have said. Now, because of that, I'm still an advisor for the current President of the United States. I am not paid by the White House. I am simply an advisor who can come in. I'm like the Giuliani, but with better heels, and not nearly in other ways. So let's just go with that space, right? But I come in and help work to make sure that they don't push the big red button. That's my literal job, is to be a person who can explain nuclear issues, just like I did with President Obama. But in my contract, I have it that the Vice President of the United States is not allowed to be in the same room as me. Why? Because if you don't think that I deserve to exist, I don't have to be in the same room with you, educating you on anything about nuclear energy. Why? Because I'm good at my job. And my job requires me to be able to think clearly. And if you are sitting across from me thinking that I don't deserve to exist, I am not going to do my job as well. And so no, you do not need to engage with every single individual who disagrees with you. But you do need to engage with as many as possible. Multiple members of Congress use they and them as my pronouns when they would never have done that before, because they recognize that I will not agree with them, but I will listen to them, that I will talk with them, and I will be willing to have a conversation. So have the conversations with the science policy professionals with which you do not agree. And last, stand firm in your experience and your expertise. I think this is what I'm always told, was that I was good at nuclear engineering, but I couldn't possibly be good at other science policy. And that's true. I do not understand evolution nearly as good as some of my other friends do. But that doesn't mean that I can't have a conversation with you about it. I know my expertise. I know how to ask a research question. I know how to build a hypothesis. And that expertise and experience is what helps me solve social policy problems. As I learned more about the program that we have had here today, you have the opportunity to help organizations like the Trevor Project and others with your experience. I need to know how data science can be protected for LGBTQ youth and the ways that they are interacting in the online world. I need to know from mental health professionals how the child's brain is developing, because many of their developments will be impacted by things like conversion therapy. These are ways that I need engagement, that I need to rely on your expertise and your experience. So don't be ashamed to be who you are. Know who you are, use it for good, and make sure that others understand just how awesome you are. That's my conversation. I hope it was helpful. I'm sorry it wasn't all about science policy. Thank you. I really hope that you have an amazing rest of your event. I'll stand for a couple of questions, and thank you for your time. It is really good to be back in this room, by the way. I have literally always been in those chairs for like AAAS event. This is like, I know this auditorium like the back of my hand, because I've always been here for science policy issues on that side. It's really cool to be up here getting to talk about LGBT issues. So thank you again for the opportunity. One or two, do I have time for one or two questions? No? One? One question. One question. I got one question. Anyone have a good question or a question? Yes.
Thank you very much. That was an incredible speech, and I genuinely enjoyed it.
Thank you.
My name is Akbad, and one thing that you mentioned really stuck with me. When you were at MIT, you mentioned that you got in with an Lgbt Fellowship, and that label kind of stuck with you. Mm-hmm. So you felt like you had to go the extra distance in order to, I guess, prove your value of being there. Yep. How were you able to navigate that without losing yourself in the process?
Yeah, a lot of depression to start with. To be very honest, MIT is really, I mean, everyone recognizes that it's a pressure cooker. But there's a reason that MIT has such high rates of suicidal ideation. Is because no one feels that they deserve to be there. As soon as they get there, they feel that they don't belong. And I had to remember that I didn't feel like I belonged because I had gotten in on my identity. In a way. Now let's be very clear, I clearly was academically qualified, I just wasn't remembering that. I was saying, well, this is who's paying for me, that must be the most important part of my life. No, I'd gotten into MIT because I knew how to do my job. Also, I happened to be LGBT, and they thought that that perspective was important. So how did I not lose myself? I started by losing myself. to be very, very clear, I was not involved in LGBT orgs, which I had founded the very first LGBT resource center in the state of Kansas, and then I basically took all the glitter off when I first got to MIT, even as a fellowship person, because I was so tired of people telling me of that I didn't belong. And so maybe if I looked like them, I would belong more. That led to severe depression. And I started realizing really early on that I didn't agree with some of my friends. Many of them were talking about, for example, nuclear weapons in a way that they thought, well, these are how we're going to expand the nuclear weapon system. And I was founding an organization saying maybe we should have less nuclear weapons, which was not popular with my cohorts. And I started realizing, oh, I don't have to agree with you to be equal with you. And that was something that I started realizing, was that they were also all really depressed and not feeling like they belonged to be there, but they were able to hide it because there was so many of them in the same system, that they all looked the same. So when they were sitting in class, they weren't thinking, I'm alone. They were thinking, I'm doomed. There's a difference. Alone and doomed is much worse, because feeling doomed but knowing that you have your classmates also being like you means that, okay, well, we're all gonna fail this test, right? I thought, I'm gonna fail this test and no one's gonna care. So I had to remember that someone did care. My community cared. And yes, I was the prototypical person who, as soon as it happened, I came out in a shower of glitter and attended every LGBT event I could, because I was realizing that was my family. I haven't gotten to talk to my family for a very long time. But I have a community, and I had left them thinking that I needed to look like others, and remembering afterwards that looking like others wasn't what I was at MIT for. I was at MIT to learn. And that learning could be done however I looked. I hope that helps.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody. Have a lovely evening.